Welcome to the Friendly Aussie Podcast.
This episode is a continuation of our previous episode, number 8. It's a sit-down discussion with Abe from the Whakamana Cannabis Museum in New Zealand. And there'll be another part coming out after this as well. It's kind of a three-parter discussion, so enjoy.
So the Friday 420s was a big turning point because that was a weekly thing, and so there was a lot of regular people coming around all the time, and it did become like an actual community. You know, it was like a more like a permanent space, even though it was out in public. You know, sometimes we'd set up a marquee. There was the Fire and Circus Club had their meeting at the same place at the same time, so it was like a festival atmosphere basically.
Excellent.
It's still happening?
It is, but not to the same scale. But
Sure.
in those early days, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was never under any threat. Like at that time, our university only had contract security guards locking the buildings.
Wow.
So if a security guard came and was like, "You can't fucking smoke weed here," you're like, "Not your job. Get out of here." And like if they were like, "We're gonna call the police." Like, well, we hotboxed the police station, so go ahead and call them. But it was that sort of really made the idea of this permanent space kind of almost within reach. And
Sure.
After a while, the university got sick of it, and we were going bigger and bigger and bigger. And so they did. Coincidental to this, there was also a plague of alcohol-fueled riots at our university year after year due to a annual sort of pub crawl from the university in Christchurch, where they would buy cars for under $500 and make them up like parade floats in various sort of politically incorrect and misogynist and racist themes, and do a pub crawl from Christchurch to Dunedin. And when they'd get to Dunedin, it was just absolute chaos. And basically all the bogans from all of provincial New Zealand knew the date. So they all just converged, and it was just drunken mayhem. And it basically turned out like the main student accommodation street looking like Baghdad with like flipped over, burnt out cars
God.
And fucking
Like
way
Hong
more.
Kong at the moment, kind of.
Just like insane. But yes, not for any political purpose.
No,
not
no,
even
no.
because we lost a sports game.
No.
Just for no fucking reason. Just they're drunk. So
Cool.
yeah. So the university had to kind of be seen to crack down on that.
Yeah, sure.
But it wasn't that simple. But in the end, sorry, I'm just going to pause for a second. You can edit this.
Oh, no doubt, mate. It's my job. Thank you.
But yes, in the end, the only way the university could put a stop to it was by buying all of the pubs. They bought every pub within a certain radius of the campus and changed it into a university building, like shut it down, turned it into a study center.
That's heavy.
And so that was like, and now, I mean, they've still only put a dent in it because they didn't buy all the off licenses. And they're just pumping it. Now it's all just house parties. And so, a woman
People
was
just
crushed
don't give
to
up.
death when there was an overloaded house
Whoa.
party most recently. So, yeah. But alcohol versus cannabis, just a little segue there. But so the university, to address this, they brought in their own like quasi-campus police force. They wanted to, because they want to be like an American Ivy League university.
Right.
Our vice chancellor went to Princeton, and she's American, and she's a bit like got very short woman who's like got a chip on her shoulder and wants to prove that Otago is world class. And
How many students are at the university?
about 20,000.
Okay, so it's a big uni.
Yeah, and there's 20,000 in other like polytech tertiary educations, and then there's
Right.
like thousands of high school students and major boarding schools for all like the farm areas and stuff. So it's like a third of the population is under 35.
Damn. It's
So
university time.
I always said that it was the highest per capita cannabis use rate in all of New Zealand, and New Zealand in some surveys previously has claimed to be the highest per capita cannabis use rate in the world. So that would make the Dunedin the highest use rate, of the highest use rate country, and actually the most intense pocket of cannabis use. But
Concentrated.
actually,
That's cool.
Dunedin has a lot of cannabis users
Yeah.
or potential cannabis users, aspiring cannabis users, but very little cannabis supply. So it's
right.
capped. The actual cannabis use, the potential cannabis use is not realized.
There's a capacity.
The actual cannabis use is constrained. And since I've moved to Christchurch, my new business partner in the expanded Whakamana Museum is wanting to argue that Christchurch is the highest per capita cannabis use rate place
right.
in New Zealand, which is the highest in the world, and that's why. And what we've decided is that the highest per capita cannabis use rate location in New Zealand is wherever I'm living, because I use so much cannabis that it bumps.
I think that's a safe bet for sure. Yeah. Nice.
But
So from there, like 2006, is that where we're at?
yeah,
2000?
so they brought in the campus police force, the
Okay.
campus watch, and they weren't actually police. And because we used to have compulsory student unions in New Zealand, and
Right.
that made a huge political difference on campus,
Yeah, it would've.
because the students actually their voice had weight politically, and so we used to have student meetings, and it had to be a 10% of the population quorum.
Yeah, yeah.
And they had to be ratified and stuff, and nothing too bad could get through. And we pushed against the campus watch. No one wanted it. We don't want to be policed. It was fine how it was.
Yeah.
And so the uni had to kind of ram it through secretly.
Gee.
And at first they said, oh, they're just the guys locking buildings, just like the ones we had before doing the same thing. They don't even report to the proctor, the behavior guy. They report to the property services cleaning up the rubbish people. And they passed it off in that way. And then they had an internal review where they're like, oh, this isn't quite business efficient. Maybe he should be in the student services role with the proctor. And they shifted them right after they got them in. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And that process didn't require student consultation. And so then all of a sudden they had this mandate over student behavior and reported to the
Damn.
proctor. And I guess I should also say that at Otago, and the reason why we were able to get away with the 420s for so long is because, again, just like the New Zealand police have this hang up about beating protesters, Otago University specifically has a hang up about beating
Yep.
protesters, because
Yep.
university in New Zealand used to be free. And when they started charging for it, all the students at Otago occupied the main clock tower administration building and sat and linked arms.
Yep.
And the riot squad came and bashed them up seriously hardcore, and it was front page of the news.
It's really interesting to
Ever
hear
since then, police have been theoretically not allowed on campus, but
Right.
they crept back in.
I see. But that's the history of the whole campus movement, activist movement.
Exactly, the strong unionism, and subsequently, we had all of my early activism was under a Labor government.
Yeah, right.
Then in 2008, that changed to
You had
the
national.
right-wing national government,
Yeah.
and they brought in voluntary student membership, made it the law that you could not be compulsory, and that's decimated.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Otago University Students Association has gone from a breeding ground for future members of parliament to basically just the lowest of the low marketing students.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a push in Australia to make that voluntary student unionism the kind of mainstay. I know that same thing is happening at QUT, but I think the party that was kind of behind it got defeated. Epic.
But
And
Campus Watch
politics on
came in.
campus.
They became the proxy police force, and their first thing, because they couldn't really do anything about the alcohol harm, and all of it was occurring off campus where they had no mandate, was to actually come and try to move us on. And so they came to the 420s, and they came you gotta go, and basically no, we don't. What's new? And the guy, their team leader, who was kind of a ex-cop tough guy, came up and was, and this is where I stepped up. This is where I became a known activist figure, because previously I had just hung in the background. And because of my immigration status, basically it was, I wanted to make sure I had full citizenship before I did anything crazy. Even though I'd hotboxed the police station, I was kind of I don't think I should be in here. And so by that time, I had got my citizenship, and this team leader was basically like getting real intimidating, and he was going to succeed in scaring everyone away. And I was kind of like, well, that is not acceptable. There's, he doesn't have the right. I can't allow that to happen. And so I went and got in between and was like, look, dude, this is how it works. This is what we've been doing. You have no authority, come and talk to me. And there was a bit of back and forth, and he tried the old, we're going to call the police line. And again, it was like, go ahead, buddy. And luckily it took long enough that the student magazine noticed from their office that was kind of overlooking the quad where it was all happening. And their photographer ran down and started shooting
convenient.
photographs.
Awesome.
And so there was a, there was this basically, stoners tell Campus Watch to go fuck themselves story that came out. But because our protest occurs on a Friday and the print deadline for the student magazine to come out on Monday is Thursday, it didn't come out immediately on the Monday. It came out on the following Monday. So another Friday 420 had already occurred in between that, and they didn't even show up.
Yeah.
It was like a storm in a teacup. They tried it on and nothing happened. And then they didn't try it again. They were like regrouping. But then this was printed in the student magazine. And then anytime something scandalous happens on campus, the student magazine prints it. And then on that Monday, the newspaper in our town reads the student magazine and then rehashes these original stories that the student magazine wrote without crediting them. And but in this case, it was like 2 weeks old news or whatever. But they put it on the front page. It was
wow!
Stoners tell Campus Watch to go fuck themselves. So that really upset the university, as you can imagine.
Yeah, and gave you a bit of a profile, I suppose. That was basically your.
Well,
time.
so then, what really gave the profile is the newspaper put it on the front page. So the nightly news then reads out the headlines of the major newspapers, and Dunedin is still considered a major city in New Zealand, and so all of a sudden the nightly news was reading out, campus stoners tell security to go fuck themselves.
My God.
So that was, by this time it was like the Wednesday or something, like almost 2 full weeks later. And then, so from that, off the back of that being just read out in the headlines, just the one sentence, I got a call from Close Up, which was like the 2020, and they wanted to do a thing. And so by the time they came down, it was like 3 or even 4 weeks since the thing, and they never, the Campus Watch, they tried it once and they never ever tried to show up again. And
Still made news.
Then they filmed this close-up piece. Everybody said, don't trust the media, they're gonna make you look like idiot stoners.
Yeah.
But I talked to the guy, and we just, I believed him and I trusted him.
Sure.
And he lionized us. Because the university marketing and communications didn't play ball. So we were playing ball, so he took our side.
Yeah.
And so he made them look like
do.
clowns and made us look like fucking philosophers, basically.
Yeah.
And that was what made it start, because that was on like Friday prime time, and it was like, shit, these guys are fucking onto it. And I was the main spokesperson for that. And so that was kind of what, and from that point on, I was blacklisted at the university, and my career as an academic did not advance any further. And
As you can tell.
so
Tariq in the future.
yeah.
So what was that? Sorry.
I was just thinking of Tariq, one of our friends.
Oh yeah.
He's an activist at university, and I'm like, he keeps saying he wants to leave. I'm like, oh, I reckon there's going to be a way.
He'll just fuck off to another country where they don't care about that kind of thing.
Maybe. Anyway, sorry.
But yeah, at that point, it was basically like either go with your tail between your legs and say, oh, I'm sorry I did this, and kiss the university's ass.
Yeah.
Or go all in with the cannabis. And so we took this newfound fame and we ran with it. Like, we were basically mentioned in the student magazine or on the cover, 15 out of 30 issues in the academic year. In the next year, we started a radio show, New Zealand's only cannabis-themed radio show, that ran for 10 years.
Oh.
We did a week-long cannabis awareness week that had speakers and lecturers and a big debate where we actually tricked our Associate Health Minister, Drug Czar, into coming thinking he was at an official launch, and he unveiled some bogus statistics and then got ripped to shreds by a million like hand-picked pro-reform experts, including our professor of law. And it was really... And from that point, we started noticing undercover surveillance. And there was a major undercover surveillance operation that went for over 6 months, where first we just saw what we thought were people taking pictures in bushes of the 420s. Then we counter-surveilled them and saw them go back to actual marked and unmarked police cars. And then we had these crew-cut types turning up in the protest, asking to buy cannabis right away. I'd never seen them before. Geez. Very obvious. But by this time, when the police started filming us, we thought, well, we need to film them. Like, YouTube was new. Yeah. And basically all that was on YouTube was police brutality videos. And so we're like, we need to get us a fucking police doing dodgy shit video so that we can, get some viral. Before anyone knew what viral was. And so we were trying to film the police filming us. And then we were like, well, why don't we just film our thing as like a video podcast, because this was a whole new thing. And we had film students and science communication students and stuff. And so we started filming the 420s, in a set area for only people who wanted to be on camera and trying to have a political chat. Because that's what was great about it was catching up with the week and having political chats. It was like a pub full of, science and philosophy students, but are getting stoned instead of getting drunk. And so we showcased that, and we caught the undercovers on camera coming to the thing because we were filming everyone, and they were so obvious, and we would upload them right away, and we had this whole archive of footage. And then basically they decided, they did all this surveillance for months, and there was not some gang running it, and it wasn't like, I wasn't some kingpin, with a vast criminal network that they were going to take down. It was like a bunch of university students turning up and being like, dude, do you know where to score a 20? Nah, man, do you? Nah, do you? It's like literally half the time they were trying to score. It's like, actually, you're at the wrong place. But so they just decided to arrest me in public. Wow. And that's such a political move. Basically scare everyone off. What's that?
Was that recorded?
It was. And so we were just doing a stall. Now, they didn't have the guts to come to a 420 because that would have been too many people, but we did market day stalls. And I guess the other point I meant to make about the student union politics was, so at that time, we would vote everything through the union. So when we started the 420s, we put a motion to the union to support it.
Cool.
And we had the numbers at the meeting, and the motion was passed.
So you could pass it.
And then we voted as a student body to declare all of campus a prohibition-free zone where cannabis laws did not apply.
Nice.
And then we went further, and the association encouraged all students to smoke cannabis in public as an act of protest,
like defiance,
until prohibition was overturned.
Incredible.
And so we basically had this autonomous status, quasi-legally, not functionally
within
legally.
The union, you're saying?
Within the university, because it was student grounds. Police weren't allowed on campus because they beat us, a couple decades ago. This was a political sanctioned club through the union that had passed these motions declaring basically a little micronation where cannabis was allowed on the university campus, not just Friday, but anytime. So we started just doing whatever and meeting up at other time, people just smoking wherever we want. If those of us were hardcore, we were trying to respect the spirit of the motion.
Yeah. Created a piece of heaven.
But period of time. Wow.
But so when we would have market days, we would always just smoke on the stall. And, lots of exchange students were new. We have tons of exchange students from, Europe and North America and South America. They all love weed. If you choose to come to New Zealand, for any reason, you basically love weed because it's naturey and hippie. And so we'd have a whole new crop of exchange students every semester, and they'd be like, oh, what? You can just smoke weed here? Are you, what? We're like, yeah, look, here, there's a joint right here. Let's smoke here, man. Let's share and blah, blah. And so we were always doing that. And so somebody came up to us on the market stall and was like, there's like a group of like 6 uniformed police officers assembling on the other side of the building, and blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, well, it must be for some official appearance because it couldn't be for us because we do this all the time and whatever. And
Yeah.
and so then they came up to the stall and they were like, "Are you Abe Gray? You know, we need you to turn out your pockets." And I was like, "No, you can't just do that." I'm like, "I'm on a political stall. It doesn't mean I have cannabis on me. That's not the evidential threshold that you need." And they're like, "Oh, look, we're not going to get into this. You just need to turn your pockets." I'm like, "Well, you know, you need to satisfy me that you have evidence before I'm going to consent to a search." And they're like, "A member of the public said they saw you smoking cannabis." I was like, "Well, are they trained to identify narcotics? How would they know that what I was smoking is cannabis? Because I'm on a cannabis stall? Sorry, mate. Member of the public hearsay, not the threshold." And they're like, "If you don't turn out your pockets right now, you're going to be arrested for obstruction."
Damn.
And I was like, that sounds like you just trying to intimidate me into consenting so that then when this is litigated later, you're going to say I consented to the search. I do not. You know, you cannot. And then they just started wrenching my arms behind my back and were like, "That's it. We're going." And so I was trying to signal to my stallmates to take the pipe and weed out of my pocket, but they didn't quite get the signal. But I was basically screaming out, you know, "I'm being falsely arrested. They haven't provided evidence." And this was in the middle of a main student market day, like right at lunchtime. And so all the students started crowding around.
Sure.
And we had built quite a reputation at that point, and it was like, no student likes to see other students getting arrested, even if you don't necessarily support their politics, especially if you know that, you know, the students decided, even if you didn't agree with it, that they were supposed to be, you know, allowed to do this. And so basically students started jostling the police and trying to pull them off of me.
Wow.
And they were vastly outnumbered. And then all of a sudden, these fucking plainclothes dudes emerge from the crowd and start trying to hold the crowd back. And like, students would be like, "Who are you?" And we're going to swing on them. So they had to show their badges. And like, so these undercovers all of a sudden revealed their position, showing their badges.
Politics.
And in hindsight, they had a trained person observe me smoking cannabis. So they did have lawful authority to search me, but they weren't prepared to tell me that because they didn't want to give away the undercover's positions.
Yeah.
So theoretically, I should have submitted to them and then litigated that later in court. But that wouldn't have helped me because I did actually have the weed on me.
Sure.
And so, you know, this is all legalese. But for those who are interested, you know. But by this point, one of our science communication students, we hadn't been filming it because it wasn't a 420, but he saw what was happening and he ran over to the Ciroc dancing club that had their stall that they were filming and was like, "I need to take your camera." And was like, he was a trained TV news cameraman. And so he just got in there and he was like, he was not shy about getting right up in the police's face and filmed it. And this is on YouTube, this footage today. This was the first viral video out of Otago University. We finally had our police brutality moment, but unfortunately it was me.
It was
being
you.
brutalized. And
Your motto.
Yeah.
We'll embed that in the article.
Yeah, we didn't really want that. So my colleague and future co-founder of the Cannabis Museum, Julian Crawford, he was the local candidate for the Aotearoa Legalized Cannabis Party, and he was supposed to be on the market stall because this was around the time of the 2008 election, campaigning.
Right.
And at that same time, the local Green Party member of Parliament, Materia Toure, who's since retired, she just also happened to be at the market day campaigning. So she started getting in the undercover officers' faces being like, "Why are you harming my constituent? I demand to know, you know, what your authority is. You know, let me see your badge number." Like writing down this little Maori female member of parliament, writing down the badge numbers of all these police on the YouTube video.
Wow.
Like getting in their face, you know, demanding to see their authority. And then
That's so special.
Julian was late to the stall. He wasn't even there yet and turned up. He was like, you know, "Where the fuck are you?" And then he was parking and he saw this fracas, like, so the police were basically trying to move me outside of the quad, which is no vehicle access, around to and the crowd's getting bigger and bigger, and it's being filmed, and the undercovers are holding everyone back, and Materia, the MP's berating them, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. And so more squads are arriving, like 7 squad cars come to where there's vehicle access, and they're trying to get me around to there. And Julian is finally getting there late, and he's just parking, and he sees this whole police thing happening out of the corner of his eye. He's like, "Oh, I wonder what that's going on." You know, it's like, couldn't possibly be the cannabis stall. And then he's like, "Wait, they're trying to put Abe in the car." And so he just parked his car like right there, just like left it sort of semi-illegally. And he's a black belt in karate, and so he ran up on top of the police car and did like a flying swan dive into the police who were holding me, and I had gone all stiff, and they were trying to fold me into the car. They couldn't get me, and I was all stiff. And then Julian out of nowhere just comes like flying into them, and they have to let me go and throw the hands up and to like catch him.
Right.
And I managed to take off running.
Escape, yeah.
And then but then another undercover snagged me and they got me down. And then by this time, 2 people are like laying down in front of the police cars, and it's like, yeah, it's just very intense. And, they can't go anywhere. And
how much did you have in your pocket?
Oh, like under a gram. Yeah. And
all this.
And so I ultimately got discharged without conviction.
Yeah.
Which is where they basically are just like, this was over the, like you did do this, but you don't deserve to be punished. You've already been punished enough, basically. Mm. And so I didn't get a record for it or anything, or, it was, that incident was that was news coverage for a whole week. It was just front page after front page on the nightly news. TV1, took the side of the cops.
Yeah,
and TV3 took our side. But we actually had like HD handycam footage that we had been posting on YouTube. And so the one network that took our side was able to show that there were actual undercovers, and that it had been a pattern and how it all unfolded, and the narrative that I just told you was legit, whereas the police was like, these guys are associated with gang members and they're dealing drugs, and we had to do something, So that made the Friday 420s a very famous thing. So like from that initial close-up appearance to my arrest had been basically like a full 12 months of, always in the news, always on the student magazine, radio show, videos, public events, like the full court press. And it was Googleable now.
I see.
And so tourists started finding out about this. If you Googled Cannabis New Zealand, you would find, and basically if you wanted to score weed as a tourist in New Zealand, there was no public forum that you could go to, but you knew that there was this thing every Friday at 420. The students smoked there. There was people openly buying and selling, and it was like, this sort of carnival atmosphere. It was like, I want to go check this out.
Cool.
Like deliberately diverting their itinerary, because Dunedin doesn't always get included, to come there and check it out. And we noticed it was like clockwork, like every Friday. And by this point, actually, we had increased, because when they first came at us, we were like, okay, well, then we're going to do Wednesday as well. And so we were doing Wednesday and Friday and every day in between whenever we wanted. And tourists were coming, and they were like, every Wednesday and Friday, there was at least 10 backpackers from Europe and stuff wanting to find it out. And that's what kind of was gave the genesis of the museum, because there was a real need for frequently asked questions explanation, like almost an information kiosk for tourists to explain this history that I just told you more succinctly.
And it's taking some time. That's true.
Yeah. And so, because it was basically like, is it real? Yeah. Where is it?
Yeah.
Why is it allowed to happen? Is it safe?
Sure.
What should I expect if I'm buying on the black market? All of these main questions, did I get a good deal? Am I in the right place?
All the important stuff.
So, all the stuff I would want to know if I was in another country.
Yeah. Well, this is why we started Fab.
Yeah, similar
exactly.
It's very similar.
The important
the resources
stats,
of the stone.
vital statistics. Yes. Also at that time, the science communication program at our university blew up. It used to be like just a diploma in natural history filmmaking. It was like one of the few places where you could study to become the next David Attenborough. I was a big David Attenborough junkie. And so I was a botanist, not a natural history filmmaking student, but I knew a lot of natural history filmmaking students because we all love nature and they all smoked weed. And so we would hang out and stuff. And the department evolved into science communication. It got bigger and bigger as their sort of buzz status grew. And so they incorporated books and websites, and around about 2011, 2012, all the rage was interactive museum exhibits.
Wow.
And that was the new thing that the students had to do to prove that you could really tell a story, about a complicated concept.
That's amazing.
And basically I was toying with the idea of doing a postgrad in science communication, because when I was hanging out with all these guys and going to all their seminars and public talks and film screenings and stuff, it was it was clear that like we were trying to communicate a complex scientific subject.
Yeah.
And I understood the science and most people didn't.
Right.
And that we had tried all of these different communication methods. We had done pamphlets. We had done street protests. We had done public events. We had done podcasts, you know, like basically everything that they have to do for coursework. We had done just to try to communicate that cannabis laws should be reformed.
Sure.
And so we thought, well, we need to do this new type that they haven't, you know, that we haven't done yet. And that was the interactive exhibit. So we made the first, and by this point, myself and my colleague Julian had graduated.
Right,
and
yeah.
we wanted to put more effort into the Legalized Cannabis Party.
Sure.
And we needed kind of an office to go sort of full time to make websites and do communication projects for cannabis reform organization nonprofits, like a
Wow.
little headquarters, green screen, you know,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of that communication tools similar to what we have here.
Quite
But that had to be in a flat because we couldn't afford it. And so Julian was basically living there.
Yeah,
and then in
yeah.
the front room,
Oh,
we put up
very similar.
in the front room we put up this display. He wasn't as tidy as you are.
You can thank my girlfriend.
Yeah. So we had to move him out eventually. But in the front room, we put a display that had this FAQ for tourists of how to find the 420 and how it had come about. And we expanded and we went beyond just our own history and delved back into the, you know, protest history of the university itself, which was really rich. And some key figures in New Zealand cultural history had been Otago University stoners. And so we
Right.
pointed that out.
That's great.
And
Wow.
that went viral. As soon as we said this is New Zealand's first cannabis museum, you know, because this was just one exhibit, but the room we were saying this is a museum, and we're like, this is authoritative, you know, this is worthy of our gravitas. And so, but that actually was an amazing sort of bit of propaganda, because as soon as we called ourselves a museum, now part of it was timing, you know, time had moved on, but it hadn't really then. I mean, this is
Sure.
2012, 2013 we're
Yeah,
talking about
yeah.
now.
Recent
And
history.
so, but time had moved on enough that when we called ourselves a museum, people were like, oh, this is unassailable, legitimate fact,
Yeah, that must
institutional,
be
not
legit.
some stoner trying to push his own agenda so
No.
he can get more high. Even though it was the exact same people, exact same message, exact same. It was just a little bit more polished.
You became a curator.
Well, and, yeah, exactly. And initially it wasn't even polished. We just used the word museum. Then we had to try to live up to it because it went so viral.
Yeah, of
because everybody
course.
was expecting this thing, you know, of like, okay, like, I mean, I back myself, but it was like, okay, now we have to lift
Actually
our game.
do it.
And
Yeah.
and that was how the museum basically started. And, you know, it became a 24-hour space. It wasn't just
Wow.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday, which the 420s eventually expanded to because they did try to bring in a smoking ban also to thwart the 420s. And so we were just like, oh, we'll just use vaporizers. Don't
keep
worry,
doing
bro.
it.
We want to be healthy. And we'll do it 3 days a week now because you tried to fuck with us. And but then we had a permanent 24-hour space. And then we could have events and we could just do all these things. And once Julian moved out, we made it into an Airbnb. And that just took the whole concept even more viral because, like, people love, like, the idea of a night at the museum, you know?
Yeah,
like,
sure.
so
Stay at
staying
the
overnight
Cannabis
in a
Museum.
museum is, like, a meme in and of itself. And
No
so,
doubt.
yeah, it was just all these powerful memes coming together. And
You seem to have an intuition when it comes to, you know, playing with the public's perception almost.
well, look, I mean, we tried and failed a lot of different times.
Sure, yeah.
But I know what I would think would pass the smell test.
Right.
You know, that's what I go by.
That's good.
And when I was speaking up, it was just like, surely somebody's going to say something.
Sure.
Surely.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to have to be the one to say it. Okay,
It's
well, you know, and I mean, look, and not everybody has had as much of an opportunity for education or whatever. And not everybody, you know, even really intelligent people aren't able to kind of relate to the public or whatever. And so it takes kind of a perfect storm.
I agree.
And look, I have had basically zero success politically in New Zealand. I've been banging my head against a brick wall for almost 20 years. And
sure.
the only thing that changed was the New Zealand Herald and TV New Zealand stopped being popular, and Facebook and Netflix started controlling people's minds, and they come from California where weed is legal, and everybody changed their mind. No thanks to me, but hey, I'll take it.
Yeah, you'll take credit for the 2020 referendum.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
you've been
fingers
there for a long
crossed.
time.
Like, what brought on that 2020 referendum?
The 2020, that's a very, very interesting story.
Yeah.
This is episode 3. No, I'm just kidding. So the idea of a referendum, New Zealand is very interesting politically when it comes to referenda. So we have the facility to put citizens-initiated referenda, but you have to get like 10% of not enrolled voters, but eligible voters. So that's like if turnout is like normally a third, then that means you have to get 30% of voters, you know, of actual voters. And so to sign a petition to put something to the vote, and it's not legally binding, and it can only be a yes/no question.
Right. It's almost like a plebiscite.
It's a bit like toothless shit, and only a few have ever been done, and they've mostly been shit.
Yeah.
And like, people get the signatures, and it's some super like right-wing Christian or racist agenda, and then nobody turns out and votes, and they don't pass, and the turnout was like 1% or whatever or something. And I'm exaggerating, but this is the flavor. But it was always the thought, because referenda is what had been successful in, you know, the first U.S. states, and that's what we were looking to, is like, well, we were confident that within our bubble, public opinion was very high. But we thought New Zealand, all this talk of the highest per capita use rate, surely there's something there. Like, we have a new saying at Whakamana that cannabis is Kiwiana. Kiwiana is like these cultural Kiwi icons, like touchstones, things that are uniquely Kiwi. And, cannabis isn't uniquely Kiwi, but New Zealand cannabis culture is pretty unique, you know? I don't know if you guys have ever done spots with the knives. Yeah.
Hot knives.
Yeah. So
that did come from New Zealand.
It did. Yes. And we have you guys to thank for chop. So it's reciprocal.
I agree. It's give and take in the cannabis community. For sure.
But so I think that I'm just remembering the question.
The referendum.
Yes, the referendum. I needed to give you a little outtake like that. So citizens-initiated referenda, there was always the idea we should do this, but it's really hard and really expensive. And the only good ones that have ever got through have basically kind of semi-illegally used the infrastructure of existing political parties, volunteers, to kind of get the signatures. So there was no way that the ragtag New Zealand cannabis reform movement was ever going to get the 300,000 signatures, and we might try, but then even then it wasn't legally binding, and you'd have to wrangle over this single yes/no question with no nuance.
You have to really get the questioning right.
Yeah, and obviously, the cannabis movement can't agree on, which way is up and down. So, but the other facility in New Zealand is our MMP electoral system. Right. So some stalking horse third party, if they held the kingmaker position in the balance of power, they almost did cannabis legalization in the past. Then someone in that same position undid cannabis legalization. So presumably we could do it again. But and that's where the idea of a legalized cannabis party, in a lot of places, it's like there's no way in hell. Like, it is kind of a joke. But in New Zealand, well, it was also a joke. But for those of us who are true believers, it was like, this is potentially feasible to get the 5% required. Or to potentially, win a strategic electorate and then coattail in people under the 5%.
Much more conceivable than the hemp party in Australia doing anything.
Yeah, so I mean, we put energy into that, and that was a thought. But the referendum was always the one that was like, after trying and failing a few times, like the Legalized Cannabis Party, when they debuted on our first MMP election in 1996, got 1.66%.
Ooh.
That's as close to 5 as a lot of people have gotten, other than Christian parties, which always seem to get 4.99. Thank God.
So low.
But Yeah, there's God for you. Anyways, but
He's actually
cruel irony.
He's
got a sick sense of humor.
He's a law, actually.
But after trying and fail, like basically the Green Party poached their best people and sucked the vote out, and that's how the Greens got in 1999 when they decided to go on their own, independent for the first time. And they had that mandate for cannabis legalization, and that's where the cannabis legalization that I thought was going to happen came about from them in that position that was influential of that minor party.
I get you.
But basically in the 2002 election, when it was undone, the Green Party was so badly burned. The context to that was the Green Party and the Labour Party, who they had been buddy-buddy with to do the legalization, got in a fight over genetic modification. Ooh. And it turned out that there had been some genetically modified corn trials that weren't actually legal, that had been allowed. And that was published in a book by this guy who's like a serial author who always publishes a book during our elections that upsets the apple cart. And this was one of his first ones. And this was the second one. His very first one was about the echelon spy bases collecting all of the global data, which we're now also well aware. But that was back in the 90s. He sat there at sunset and he could see through the domes which way the dish was pointing, and he used publicly available satellite data to prove that it was intercepting communication satellites for this NSA base. So that was pretty cool. He's a cool guy, but he really drove a wedge between Labour and the Greens in 2002. And it was like the Greens were never going to be forgiven. And they had such a bad taste in their mouth over that they basically abandoned cannabis. They felt like that cannabis had counted against them and lost them the election. Yeah, okay. And they really didn't let it go. And they walked totally away from cannabis. So I arrived thinking, I'm going to join a political party that loves cannabis, that's in the government. Was like, they're not in the government anymore and they hate cannabis now. And so that only left the Legalized Cannabis Party for me. But after trying and failing so many times with that, of tweaking things and just like still not improving the vote and putting a lot of effort into not getting much more vote, it was kind of like the referendum was the way to go. And so the idea of the citizens initiated, it's like, okay, well, we have to have a solid question. We need a massive ground game. How are we going to do this? And I happened to, one of our main sort of female labor unionist, left-wing political figures, she was like the head of the trade unions, got cancer and came out as a medical cannabis user. Yeah. And I contacted her and we were talking, and she basically could tell the Labour Party what to think. And I was getting in her ear about, okay, this is what cannabis, like she was taking it seriously. And she wasn't like trying to score political points or, use me to get some political outcome. It was like, what really should happen? What's the background? Why has nothing happened? Really trying to understand it, this woman, Helen Kelly. And she had a direct line to senior Labour politicians. And so Labour was on the outs at this point, and they really had no hope. And their vote had been getting depressed. They were down to polling like in the 30s. It was really bad. And this continued. They changed leader 3 times. And then the only thing that saved them was them rolling out Jacinda, who we have now, only 8 weeks before the election. Yeah. The male guy who was doing fuck all stood down. Yeah. And then she just like surged and, ran it home basically, and has had this, New York PR agency projecting her wokeness around the world ever since. And so... How do New Zealanders feel about that? They love it. They're fucking lapping it up, man. Yeah. Good. So is the rest of the world. I mean, it's, it beats the alternative, to be honest. For sure. Yeah. For sure. But so we were trying to say to Labour through this Helen Kelly woman, you've got no hope. Your actual best hope to turn out the missing million, eligible but not voting voters that are mostly left-wing would be to have a cannabis referendum on the ballot at the same time as the general election. Yes. And so the only other way to have a referendum in New Zealand, like the best thing would be if the parliament would just pass sensible cannabis legislation. I mean, that would avoid the referendum thing. They're not going to do that. Jobs, MPs. Getting a citizens-initiated referendum is too hard. There is one other case of specially created parliamentary referendums, which the most recent example is when we tried to change our flag. Yeah, right. And from that point, we learned that Parliament can pass a law to have the people vote on something. Doesn't mean they support it. just means they're giving the people a chance. They can be very specific. It can have multiple stages.
They create
It
a
can
big
be
extensive
nuanced and
bowl.
matrices of outcomes, not just yes and no. And that it is binding. It can be binding.
Yeah, true.
And so we were trying to say to Labour Party, you need to get a private members bill pulled out for a referendum for cannabis at the
Right.
next election, and you can probably get the numbers to get that over the line with crossbench support.
Sure.
You know, because it's a referendum, and we'll just word it in a way so that it's binding. And back at that point, you know, there was no appetite for medical either, so we wanted a 2 question about medical and recreational to gauge the support.
I see.
And this was written. This
Yeah,
bill was
yeah.
drafted and written. They believed her.
What
They
year?
took it and ran with it. This was 2015,
Right.
I
wow.
think. Yes, about 2015 or
So-
16.
This would have been while the Nationals were still in power.
Yes, yes. And way before Labor had any thought of how they were going to pull this out. And they
Right.
were like, okay, they're like, this makes sense. We'll try this, because they heard it from her, even though I had told them, and other times they didn't listen. But
That's how you get to them. You talk to them while they're in their political wilderness stage, and then they'll take on.
yeah,
some of your
exactly,
policy
exactly.
ideas.
Well, you talk to them through one of their insiders,
course.
basically. But they drafted it, and then so I went to my local member of parliament, who I thought we were buddies, because I had always been campaigning for the Legalized Cannabis Party on stage with all these guys. And so like all of our Green, National, and Labour MPs in North Dunedin, where was my electorate,
Yeah.
all were so high on the list that they were always in.
Huh.
And so we had these 3 people that were like actual members of parliament long term, and me in the candidate meetings, you know, and I was the one cracking jokes and the crowd favorite, and they were being boring and trying to be centrist and stuff. And so I livened it up. I made friends with it. I thought we were buddies, and they would always use me as a photo, like, oh, Abe's so smart. I support everything he says. You know, like if every cannabis user was as sensible as Abe, we wouldn't have a problem.
legalize
You
it
know,
today.
yeah. But so I thought the local Labor guy was my guy, and I went to him and
Yeah.
I was like, I've been working with Helen Kelly. We've got this referendum coming up. It's going to come across your desk soon. I don't want you to be caught by surprise, so I'm telling you this. But he was offended. He was like, you don't tell me shit. Like,
Whoa.
I'm going to tell you that we're not doing it. And they
Okay.
just killed it, basically. I was like, no, we're not doing this. It's too cannabisy. We don't want that for Labor.
Remember how it
And
lost
so-
an election? That's probably where.
Well, you know, they all have competing interests. I mean, in
Yeah.
some ways, for my guy, if the guy then, who was immediately before Jacinda, lifted the vote, that wouldn't be good for my guy, because he wouldn't rank up. Whereas if another leader fell, then he'd just go up that much higher in position. So he might have been playing the long game. Like,
Right.
well, he definitely was. Now he's the health minister.
Jeez.
But who actually, and the associate health minister is a Green member of parliament who I know, who was born in Minnesota also, who is
Oh, wow.
totally pro-weed.
Yeah, there
and
you go.
the associate health minister normally holds the drug and alcohol portfolio. My guy from North Dunedin, for the first time in recorded history, decided to keep the drug and alcohol portfolio in the main health minister. And so
I wonder
our
why.
pro associate didn't have the chance to do anything, cool
Yeah, that sucks.
with her regulatory levers. But
Sense.
That's a bugger.
yeah, so this referendum went across Labor's desk. They abandoned it. They didn't want to do it. And then they still didn't manage to pull up out of the polls. You know, this was in 2015, and I was kind of like, are you sure you don't want to still do it? You've still got no strategy. You've still got no strategy.
Yeah.
Going right up to the election, like, what are you going to do? Jacinda mania, just out of nowhere. Like, I mean, what? It's like, oh, you don't actually have to do anything related to policy, do you?
No, basically.
Yeah.
Just have
It's
a nice public image.
Yeah.
Random.
So that was annoying. I mean, again, definitely good that they probably beat National, but it was like, I would have much rather if they had a strong pivot on, emotive policy that I agreed with.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. I
who's
hear
gonna
you.
complain about that?
It's
Yeah.
it's one of those things like you either have somebody who's very appealing as a political or I don't know, just a general public figure who can take the imagination and sort of really capture people, or alternatively you have someone like Bernie Sanders who's like, basically rotting as he speaks in front of the microphone, but he's still compelling as an individual because he has these radical policy platforms that would transform America if they were instituted. So
Well, it's important context because